Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kinesiology 2030 and our first lecture of the semester. I will be your instructor for this course, and my name is Brent Day. We have done some good introductions in the discussion board of the Bright Space so far. I'm glad to be able to read at least about everyone. Unfortunately, don't get to meet you in person yet, but hopefully through the power of Bright Space, that will happen shortly. So our first lecture comes from chapter 1 of the textbook, which is a required textbook for the course. So if you haven't purchased that yet, make sure you do, because the first signed reading for this course is chapter 1. And the lecture we're going to be going over is Embracing Health and Wellness. So this is really an introductory lecture, and we're going to talk about what health is, what wellness is. We're going to go over the textbook definitions for health and wellness. We'll look at wellness dimensions, what they are, what each dimension is. We'll look at examples from each dimension. From there, we'll talk about environment and lifestyle. We'll talk a little bit about how genetics and lifestyle plays integral roles in our health and our wellness. And then we'll talk about our environment as well as some social deterrents that actually play a pretty big role in people's health. So I hope you enjoy the lecture. And if you ever have any questions, my suggestion for you is to write them down. All right, you have access to this lecture all semester, so you can pause it, write your question down, and then there will be a corresponding discussion board with the lecture where you can actually go and put your specific questions on for this lecture. So I want to make sure that if anyone has any questions or they have some thoughts about what we're talking about, I find that the best way to do that, since we're not in person and we're not in a class, is to open up a discussion board. So that way, if you have something and some experience or a little bit of knowledge that you want to share with the class or even myself, you'll have that avenue through the discussion board. All right, so let's get going on today's lecture. And as I said, the first thing we're going to talk about is just that definition of health and wellness. And we're going to look at health versus wellness, because a lot of people think they're the same, but in reality, they're a little bit different. And we're going to go over what that is. So first off, what I want to do is talk about what the definition of health is. So I got everyone to put down on the discussion board as our first sort of assigned discussion was what your definition of health was. And the reason why I wanted to do that was two ways. First off, I just wanted to see what everyone thought health was. And then secondly, I want to see, if it changes after this course. Because what I'm going to do in this course is I'm going to challenge you on that definition of health, and I'm going to give you some different ideas and different ways of looking at your health, both personally as well as a future professional within the kinesiology profession. So I'm really going to be challenging you throughout the semester about various health concerns, various health views, and I'm going to give you some different ideas of it. And so what I'm planning on doing is starting off with this lecture, which is just basically the textbook definitions, the textbook reliance of what it is. And then our second lecture on health is actually going to be the new look of health. And some things that I've discovered over the last several years about what health is and how we view health. So essentially what we're going to do is, you've defined what you think health is. I'm going to give you what the textbook definition of health is. We're going to go over this new view of health, and then I'm going to tell you what my definition of health is at the very end of that. All right. So the first thing I want you to do is look at this definition that I have here on the PowerPoint. And this is the World Health Organization definition. What's interesting about this definition, it has not been amended since 1948, which means this health definition has been there since 1948. So we're talking about 72 years of the same health definition. Now, one thing that we will go through and go over during this course is how health changes. Health has changed considerably since I've been teaching here at Langara. My definition of health 15 years ago when I started at Langara is completely different now. And the fact that the World Health Organization has a definition that is 22 years old since 1948 is a little interesting in my eyes. So that definition is health is a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So, as much as this definition doesn't indicate health is the absence of disease, which is a good point of the definition, I'm not going to completely rip this definition because, you know what, a lot of the times, we do associate poor health with disease or sickness, but generally we need to make sure that we don't pigeonhole people who do have some type of disease or some type of sickness as unhealthy. Because it's a little bit unfair because, yes, you may not have the greatest physical health because of a certain disease, but that doesn't mean that you can't excel in other areas of health. So again, I think a big point of health and the definition of health is, everyone's definition and view of health is going to be different. But the key is, does your definition go within what health is to you as a person, but also lines up with some of the scientific principles that we know through various experiences and research. So it is good that it doesn't have that, if you're sick, you're not healthy aspect of it. But what I think is we need to know that a lot of the times, we view health as a state, right? So we look at health as being, you're unhealthy, you're healthy, you're eating good, you're eating bad. It's always a state. But in reality, health is more about a process. And it should be about the process of improvement, which means, if you are trying to improve yourself and you're trying to improve your health, well, to me, that's a good start if you're someone who, maybe was, overweight or had a certain type of chronic disease, but you're trying to improve. Well, those improvements are the right steps to health. So we don't want to define that person as being in a state of unhealthiness. So, health really should not be viewed as a state, but really a process of improvement. So when we're viewing things like health, so many times we think it's being free from problems, all right? And when we do that, it makes health very static. And that's one thing I want everyone to really step away from as they go through their kinesiology diploma, kinesiology degrees, and potential professions in kinesiology is, let's remove the static health aspect and let's realize that if we view it as an ever-changing way of self-improvement, that's going to make health more dynamic but more powerful. And I think that's what we need to do to instill on the people that we teach, on the people that we train, on the people that we coach, the people that we work with. If we can instill that health is dynamic, it's ever changing, that's going to be a very powerful message, and that's going to allow them to have a real individual definition of health. So as much as we look at this, health is a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. This definition is okay, but in my eyes, it's very, very broad, right? It's very broad because when we look at it, well, what's the state of complete physical well-being? What's the state of complete mental well-being? What's the being complete with social well-being. So it's very broad because everyone is going to have their own view of what physical health is, what social health is, what mental health is. And it's important to note that, again, as I said, as long as we're following the scientific principles that are out there that outline the way to quote unquote health, then it's going to be individual and it's going to be different. All right. So, what I want to talk about next is let's look at the definition of wellness. So, what's the definition of wellness? The World Health Organization defines it as a conscious, self-directed, and evolving process of achieving full potential. So, when I read that wellness definition, that's, to me, almost what health should be. So, when we look at what health versus wellness is, really, they're the same thing. They're the same concept. Wellness, people who are in wellness, they're going to push that it's a holistic aspect of health. And that is completely true. All right. Wellness can be looked at as a holistic aspect of health. All right. But really, if we're trying to achieve wellness, we're trying to achieve health. If we're trying to achieve health, we're trying to achieve wellness. All right. So this whole health versus wellness thing, it gets a little bit confusing because in reality, they should be the same thing. And when we look at the dimensions, what we're going to see is each component has its own aspect of health. So even wellness incorporates health. So when we look at wellness, we look at health, it's really up to you to decide what is going to be the best way to incorporate these two definitions. Do you just use health? Do you just use wellness? Do you incorporate both? I personally like to incorporate both, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we look at my new thinking of health. So that's when we look at the difference between health and wellness is health can be the static part, wellness can be the more dynamic part, but really they're really important pieces together. And I personally don't like defining them individually. I like bringing them together. So in understanding the difference between health and wellness, there's another way of looking at it, a quick way of looking at it. And that is, again, going back to that definition of health being a state, right? If you're going to lean more towards the wellness side of things, then you can say health is a state of being, whereas wellness is a state of living a healthy lifestyle. All right. So again, you can see that wellness incorporates health, and then we go back to the, health being a state. But for me, I think what we want to really look at is which two terms do people associate with more? Is it health or is it wellness? And in my view, I think when we hear the word health, it has a lot stronger meaning to people versus something like wellness. And so that's what you need to tap into, right? You need to tap into who you're working with. You need to tap into your market and figure out, well, what's going to help you get your message across? Is it going to be with wellness or is it going to be with health? For me, personally, as I mentioned, I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm a kinesiologist in BC. I work with a lot of athletes. I work with a lot of people who are trying to better themselves. All right. So when people come see me, I try to improve their performance and their health. So I actually don't even incorporate wellness into my philosophy. I stick with health because I just think it's a very impactful term. Now, if I was working with more individuals that were into the holistic lifestyle, then I probably would use the term wellness a little bit, right? Incorporate wellness and add health into that wellness. All right. So when we look at health and wellness, we're going to discuss my new thinking about health in a couple lectures. Our next lecture is going to be on sleep. And then the lecture after that is going to be my new thinking on health. And what I want to really do, again, is challenge you to go beyond the static definition of health when we go through that lecture. And we're going to really talk about, what health is in today's society versus that 1948 quote. Now, one thing that I do like about wellness is their dimensions. So they have 8 dimensions of wellness that have essentially certain parts of health that are incorporated into each dimension. Now, I think this is important to look at, again, because if you're going to go down that wellness side, these 8 dimensions are something that you're going to really need to look at, focus on it, and understand, because it's going to be an important part of your practice. And what you're going to see in these terms is the word health with it. All right, so the 8 dimensions are physical health, their intellectual health, social health, occupational health, financial health, environmental health, spiritual health, and then finally we have emotional health. So those are the 8 dimensions of wellness that we go through and we look at. And we're going to go through each one and talk about them and really get into what they are and what their focus is, because it is an important part. And when we look at my new thinking of health, you're going to see how I incorporate these dimensions into my health philosophy. So the first one we're going to look at is physical health. Now, this one in our course is going to be really the most important dimension, because we are going to be focusing on things like healthy lifestyles through physical activity, healthy lifestyles through nutrition, healthy lifestyles through proper sleep. And that's really what the 3 key components of physical health are activity, nutrition, and sleep. So we're going to cover all of these in way more detail in this course and in upcoming lectures and in the textbook. So a couple things that I do want to talk about with that is I just want to give you just a quick idea of, what people are suggesting when in terms of what physical health is. So the first thing we want to look at is recommendations. So a lot of the times you'll see anytime we have these, certain definitions or certain structures, they're going to have recommendations. This is what we recommend you to do, is always the thing that looks at. Like when we look at physical activity, this is how much exercise you should do. This is how much carbohydrates you should eat. We have these recommendations. And what I want to do is look at what those recommendations are, and then we're going to explore those recommendations throughout this entire course, because it's important to understand, okay, why are these people specifically, when we look at nutrition, it's the nutrition Canadian Food Pyramid, which is by the government, and physical activity recommendations by physical fitness leaders, again, in the government. We need to figure out, why are they telling us this? We need to, understand. And I'm not trying to be anti-government or anything like that. I just want you to look at things through your own microscope versus someone else's. So when we look at the physical recommendations, and we're going to focus on the physical recommendations for adults, which is 18 to 64-year-old. Those physical recommendations are 150 minutes of moderate or more intense physical activity each week. So if you want to be, quote unquote, physically healthy, then you should be doing 150 minutes of moderate or more intense physical activity each week. Okay? Again, we will explore this further, because I can tell you right now, I am way more physically active than 150 minutes per week. Does that mean I'm being too physically active? What about someone who doesn't reach 150 minutes per week? What if there's someone who does 100 minutes per week? Does that mean they're not physically healthy? Right? So these are the types of questions you need to look at when we go through these recommendations. Some other recommendations that they have are, make sure that you do at least twice a week muscle and bone strengthening activities. So essentially they're saying, do some strength training, do some resistance training twice a week. Okay? And the other recommendation is do not sit more than 60 minutes. Now, to me, this is a really important one because right now in our society, we are getting into too much sitting. We are sitting way too much. Right now, I bet each and every one of you are sitting down listening to this lecture. Right? We are sitting too much. So I think this recommendation is actually a good one. 60 minutes, no more than 60 minutes. All right? Because one thing we need to realize is, for most people, they look at the exercise. Most people try and get 60 minutes a day. That's generally what most people try to do. 60 minutes of some sort of exercise a day. So if you're exercising for 60 minutes a day, but you're sitting for 8 hours a day, does that mean you are not sedentary because you worked out for 60 minutes, but you sat for 8 hours? And I think that's something we really need to look at. And it's something that I believe. I believe that, if you are sitting for 8 straight hours, you're sedentary. It doesn't matter how much exercise you're doing. You are sedentary. All right. We just essentially need to move more. Our society right now is so focused on exercise and it's not focused on movement. All right. So we'll talk about that in more detail as we get into physical activity, healthy lifestyles, because I think we need to be working on moving versus sitting. And you probably hear people doing stand-up desks and everything like that. But it comes down to what's called load profile. And again, we'll go over that more extensively in movement because I think it's an important thing that all aspiring kinesiologists understand is we can't sit. We have to move. Now, with nutrition, generally, most people are guided by the Canada Food Guide. Right? They're guided by, what it used to be the food pyramid. Now it's just the food guide. And essentially, if you look at it, it gives decent advice because if you look at it, it looks eat mostly vegetables and fruits. So right there, the majority of your food should come from a plant-based diet. So you look at eat mostly vegetables and fruits, then grain products. Right off the bat, that's 3 plant-based. After that, it says then milk and alternatives, then meat and alternatives, and it gives us sort of a recommended intake. Carbohydrates, we should be eating 55 to 50% of our calories from carbohydrates each day. 10 to 15% should be protein, and 20 to 30% should be fat. So I really don't want to get too much into this because this introductory lecture will turn into a 2-hour ramble, and I don't want that because nutrition, as much as these guidelines are set and they're good advice, nutrition is so much more than that. And that's why we cover nutrition 50% of this class because it's so much more than just eating fruits and vegetables and grain products and a little bit of meat and some what they call dairy and alternatives. Nutrition it's so individual, and nutrition is going to be different for everyone. Some people are going to be intolerant to certain foods. Some people are going to metabolize foods differently. So we need to have an understanding of what works for us, what doesn't, and what are the choices we should be making versus the choices we shouldn't. And one problem I have with nutrition is this is good for you, that's bad for you. Again, it goes into very, very negative aspect of food and can cause problems. So we're going to talk about that in way more detail because nutrition is a very important part of physical health. Most people, when they hear physical health, they think of fitness, physical activity, but nutrition plays a big role in that. And then the third thing is sleep. Now, I have an entire lecture ready on sleep. And the reason why is because people don't understand how important sleep is. We're starting to now, But I can tell you right now, I was not informed about sleep when I was in school. No one told me about sleep other than it was, oh yeah, it's important and it helps you grow. Like, we did not go through sleep. And I'm going to do a lecture completely on sleep so you guys can have a better understanding of how important it is and how it needs to be prioritized. And I hope that lecture is going to be eye-opening for you, because I think a lot of people push sleep away when we shouldn't. And there's a lot of benefits to sleep. And as I said, we're going to go over that completely in an entire lecture on its own. The next definition that we go look at is the emotional health. So emotional health refers to the feelings we experience and the ability to recognize and express these feelings in personally and socially appropriate ways. So these feelings can be anything from anger, worry, stress, adaptability, feeling good about ourselves, laughter, love, loneliness, fear, excitement, joy, sadness, grief, pain, and disappointment. So those are the feelings that every one of us feel. And it's important to understand that emotional health plays a big factor in our wellness, plays a big factor in our health. Because emotional stress is going to cause chronic disease. Emotional stress can cause high blood pressure. Emotional stress can cause cardiac issues. Emotional stress can hurt your sleep patterns. It can hurt your physical activity. So emotional stress is important. It's important to understand how it affects our mental health, and it's important to know how to express our emotions appropriately. And if we can learn how to express our emotions appropriately, that's going to be a big help with our health. It's going to be a big help with who we are and who we become as people. And again, it's just like anything else. It's going to be different for everyone. How we deal with our feelings is going to be different for everyone, right? Some people need to talk to people about it all the time. Some people need to write it out. Some people need to express it in song. Some people just need to physically get the anger or the frustration out, right? So it's important to know, well, how do I do this appropriately? Right? Because you don't want to harm yourself, you don't want to harm others, and you certainly don't want to bottle it in so it just becomes a chronic issue. And if you do that, it will become a chronic issue. So you need to make sure you understand how to express your emotions in a appropriate manner. The next dimension we look at is social health. Now, social health refers to the ability to develop and sustain satisfying relationships, interact effectively with others, as well as the ability to adapt to a variety of social situations. So, social health, as much as we think social health is just, hanging out with friends and seeing people and going out, it's more than that. It's how we interact with those people. It's how we read people. It's how we understand people. I mean, that's what social health is. If you look at a key component in how we communicate, is 90% of our communication is nonverbal. And it's one reason why I debate if I should put myself up on the screen when I do these types of lectures, so you can see how I'm communicating. All right. You are going to see me. I'm going to do it and get some not lectures, but some mini lectures I'm going to be putting up on with me in it. But I try to essentially verbally communicate how I'm lecturing, but sometimes I wonder, should I put myself up so you can see my nonverbal communications? But then I tried it once and I was like, oh boy, that's distracting because my hands are just going all over the place and up, down, hand moving around. I'm like, okay, I think it's better if they just focus on the words, my voice. They'll probably get more out of it. I'll do some of these mini lectures where they can see me in more of a practical setting, and we'll avoid all the crazy hand motions up on the screen that I would do. So that nonverbal is important though, because 90% of communication is nonverbal, and it involves things like facial expression, body language, and then hearing things like tone of voice. It helps us understand, how is the person feeling? How do they react when I say something? All right, that's a real important one, because that's how we get empathy, right? So if I say something mean to someone and I see that just crushes them, right away I know, oh, that was not cool, and I just made that person feel bad, and I can see it in their body language. And then it teaches you something, right? And it's important, as we really learn that at a young age. And that's why technology is becoming a problem, and things like cyberbullying is becoming such a problem, because electronic communication lacks the nonverbal cues. So it complicates things. It makes things a lot less effective during conversations. And then what happens is, individuals write these things out in the electronic format, and they probably wouldn't say that to someone face to face. But because they don't have to witness how their words are hurting someone, it's easier for them to do, right? So we need to make sure that our main form of communication isn't electronic. And again, that's why, right now I'm getting you to do some electronic communication with the class, but I'm going to be challenging you guys soon to do some visual communication with the class as well. All right, so people can see who you are and see how you interact. It's important. It's important to have those social interactions. Now, another thing I want to talk about with social health is one of the most important skills that we can have. And unfortunately, right now, for whatever reason, it might be because of the electronic aspect of it. And if you have any ideas on why this might be, I've read some research, I've read some things about this, what I'm about to talk about, and it does mainly talk about the electronic part of it. But if you have any ideas, throw it onto the discussion board. I'd love to hear it. And that's the skill of listening. Listening is really the most important skill in any type of communication. We're always looking to talk. We're always looking to try and solve the problem or try and help, instead of just listening to the person, right? Go back to the emotional health. Maybe they just need to listen to you to get their emotional health straight, right? So some skills for listening are things like being an active listener, right? Being active. So observing the body language of the person who's speaking, reflecting and repeating what the speaker says. Don't do distracting things while they're trying to talk to you, right? Don't be on your phone or listening to music or whatever. And most importantly, don't be thinking about your response while they're talking. I think that's a real big problem. A lot of people, like I said, they want to help, they want to solve the problem, they want to get their word in, whatever it is. So while that person's talking, they're just thinking about what they're saying, what they're going to say. They're not really actually listening, right? So that's a really important skill, is to sit and listen, let the person talk, really observe what they have to say. Now, another aspect of wellness that we look at is occupational health. Occupational health is things like school, right? So what you're doing right now could be considered occupational health. Obviously, working full-time, part-time is part of occupational health. Being a stay-at-home parent is considered occupational health. Being a caregiver and being unemployed, because when you're unemployed, you're searching for work, right? So it's not like you don't have to worry about your occupational health. Being unemployed, will cause some potential health problems, some stress, and it would be considered occupational health. So some good occupational health tips is in your work, in your school, whatever it is that your occupation is, making sure that you feel valued, personally yourself as well by others in your organization. Not remembering that it's not about the money that we make, but it's about what we're accomplishing. All right. And then occupational health is limited on a few things like retirees. So people who have retired, they don't have that occupational concern anymore because they're retired, but they might switch over from being a little bit more focused on the financial health, which we'll talk about next. And then also individuals who live off the land. They might not be overly concerned about occupation because really, I mean, their occupation is trying to hunt and gather food. They're the truest form of primal individuals. So that's a little bit about occupational health. The biggest tip I give to people, and I mentioned this in my introduction, usually everyone talks about, well, why are you in this job? And the number one answer tends to be is because I'm passionate about it, right? So typical answers, well, why are you an instructor? Well, I'm passionate about kinesiology. For me, I'm passionate about lots of things, and I don't necessarily make that my main goal of occupation. For me, it was figuring out what I was meant to do. That to me was more of a value in terms of occupation than just being passionate. And I had several different jobs. And then when I started teaching, I just right there, the day I taught my first class, I just knew this is what I meant to do. I meant to be up here. I meant to be with these students. I meant to help students. I meant to learn myself through this profession. I said, this is just what I meant to do. And for me, that's a far better understanding of importance of occupational health, is just having something that you're meant to do. Now, financial health is another aspect. Now, this is actually a part of the dimension that when I first started teaching wasn't in. There was no financial health dimension. This is relatively new. And it's an important one. And it's the reason why they put it in, because finances can cause a lot of stress. Finances can cause a lot of hardship. So understanding financial health and finances is really important. I think every student should take a budgeting course when they're in college, just so they have that basic skill that's needed throughout your entire life. So when we look at what financial stability does, it will play a major role in our overall health, because if you're in debt, that's going to hurt your sleep, that's going to hurt your emotional health, that's going to play a big role in a lot. So we need to know that money can be made, saved, as well as spent. We have to understand that money can fluctuate over our lifetime. There's going to be some years where we do really well, and there's going to be some years where we don't do so well. So understanding that and making sure that we're prepared for that is important to understand. Knowing what we own and what we owe recognizing our income and if we're living within our financial reality, which I think is a big problem with a lot of people, is they don't really live within their financial reality. And then just making sure that they pay their bills on time. And because not paying your bills can, hurt your future. So just making sure you pay bills on time and understand, how much money you bring in, how much money needs to go out, and have that budget. So when we look at it, we have to prioritize our expenses. And we look at two expenses that you can look at: essential expenses versus non-essential expenses. Essential expenses are groceries, rent, utilities like electricity, heat, and water, transportation, school, things that we absolutely need. Non-essential expenses are going out for dinner, alcohol, entertainment, the fun stuff, clothes, things that we want versus the things that we need. We need to make sure that we have enough money for the essentials before we start spending on the non-essentials. So it's important to understand that and having good financial health, because it will decrease a lot of stress. Now, another thing that we look at is environmental health. Now, a lot of the times when you hear environmental health, first thing you think about is the planet, making sure the planet's healthy. That's going to make us healthy. And that's part of environmental health. But another part of environmental health is the environment that we live in, the community that we live in, the house that we live in. That is part of environmental health as well. So we need to realize that environmental health involves our actions, our reactions, and our compassion towards the world in which we live in. So for physical environment examples, we look at the size of our room, the type of bed we sleep in, the desk and chair we study at, the lighting, if we have access to physical and mental health services. Environment's important. And when we get into my new thinking of health and some other aspects and talk about lifestyle, we're going to talk about environment. We're going to talk about how environment plays a key factor in our lifestyle, and we'll actually talk a little bit about it more at the end of this lecture. So typically when we think about environment, we think about the 4 R's: refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. Right? So this is the best way to sort of take care of our environment, take care of the world around us, is make sure that we refuse things that we don't need, we reduce the waste we have, we reuse as much as we can, recycle when we can. And there's actually now a 5th R, and that's called react. And the reason why we have the 5th R is because we need to make sure that we're doing things like reacting to the injustices that are happening in our environment and our society. We need to make sure that we take care of everything around us, all the people around us. All right. We need to make sure that we are understanding the movements that are coming out right now, like Black Lives Matter, the indigenous culture. We need to make sure that the social injustices that have happened over decades and decades are righted. And we can do that by writing letters, sending emails to elected officials, taking part in the protests and the demonstrations that happen. Make sure that we vote. All right, make sure that we vote, because your vote, as much as you think it doesn't matter, it matters. So anytime there's any type of election that goes on, make sure that you vote, because that is how you, as an individual, express what you think is right. So you need to make sure that you exercise your right to vote. Now, another one we look at is spiritual, all right, or now philosophical health. So philosophy, spirituality, they're kind of the same. The reason why we have spiritual and philosophy now in this, before it was just spiritual, is because we're starting to understand that, again, it's individual. Whether you are a religious individual, who follows a certain type of spiritual quests because of your religion, then that is who you are, and that's what you believe, and that's where your values are set, and that's important to you. But that doesn't mean that it's important to somebody else who doesn't happen to believe in that. right? They might have a completely different philosophy. They may not have a spirituality. I mean, when we hear this word spirituality, we always go right to things like God and religion. But in reality, spirituality doesn't have to be about that. For me, spirituality is nature. I am definitely in touch with my spiritual health when I am in nature, when I am out, hiking or going for a cold water dip in the winter in a creek. That to me is spirituality, and that's a big part of my individual philosophy. So it doesn't have to be about religion. It's what spirituality is to you. Now, the most important part of the spiritual health or the philosophy health is you need to identify a meaning, a purpose, or a value in your life. All right? If you don't have purpose, if you don't have values, then what's the point? So you need to understand who you are and who you want to be. That will give you purpose, and it will help you. It'll help you value certain things. It'll give you ethics. It'll help you navigate through this ever-changing world. So it's important to make sure you have that. All right, so we need to remember it's our thoughts, actions, and words that matter. And if they do not match who we are or who we want to be, all right, we're going to have considerable inner conflict. And inner conflict is going to cause health problems. All right, so you really need to make sure that you outline what's important to you, who you want to be, what you value the most. Now, the last one we're going to look at is intellectual health. Now, intellectual health, I think, is a very, very important one, because intellectual health, along with good emotional health, is going to help your mind, as well as physical health too. It's going to help your mind. It's going to stimulate your mind. And we're starting to see research that shows people who are physically active, who eat well, who have good emotional health, and are keeping their intellectual health up, are actually decreasing their risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. So it helps keep your brain functioning. But it also helps you stay current. It helps you stay current with the world. And that's an important thing. So intellectual health will give you the ability to think clearly, think critically, give you reasons for objectivity and thinking fairly. It's also going to help you be intellectually engaged. So when certain conversations come up, you feel like you can actually contribute because you're informed about it. You understand it. So, I mean, things like reading daily, important. Making sure, you understand what's happening in the world news-wise. And one thing that I think is important for intellectual health is picking a news source that is reliable, and valuable, not one that is just going to spread fear and hate, which so much news tries to do. So finding a news source that is really objective to what's happening and just gives you the facts, it gives you what's going on. So there's also something that plays a big role with intellectual health, and that's something called the DECIDE model. So the DECIDE model is you need to determine what the problem is and how important it is. You need to explore your options. You need to consider the consequences. You need to identify your values. You need to decide and take action. And you need to evaluate what the consequences are. And I think this is a really important model to go by, especially with how political and how important certain things are in today's world. As I mentioned with the social injustices, being informed and understanding what is the best way to get involved, and how are you going to make a difference? All right, and having good intellectual health is going to help with that. All right, so now what I want to discuss is, unfortunately, when it comes to health, our society is not, especially our Western culture, it's not overly conducive to health. When we get into healthy lifestyles, we'll talk a little bit more about it and my new way of thinking in health. We are not. It is not a conducive society to health. Uh, we are getting to the point where we are going to completely eliminate the need for physical exertion. I literally do not have to leave my house if I don't want to. I can get everything I need delivered to me. I can contact anyone in the world any way through the computer that I want or through a phone that I want. I do not have to leave the house if I don't want to. Our society is literally eliminating physical exertion. And it's concerning. It's not good. So we need to make sure that we take back that physical movement, and we understand that society, for some reason, is trying to take away that from us, and we need to make sure that we don't allow it to. But unfortunately, not everyone has the ability to reclaim their health. They have deterrents. So there is social deterrents that play a role. And those deterrents or determinants for health are things like social exclusion, a social safety network, health services, indigenous status, gender, race, disability. Okay, these play a role in health. Not everyone in certain social structures have access to health services. There's people that don't get the same health care because of the color of their skin. I don't know if you heard a while ago, there were hospital workers that were taking bets on how high indigenous people's blood alcohol was going to be when they came to the hospital. To me, that's not providing the person with the same care that you would provide another individual. And it's a problem because not everyone has the same rights and the same access to their health potential because of it. So we need to make sure that we do as much as we can to make sure that people are educated and people can have their abilities and have their freedom to reclaim their health, reclaim their movement. Some other aspects of social determinants for health as well are things like income distribution, education, unemployment, job security, employment and working conditions, early childhood development, food insecurity, housing. Those all play a role as well. And again, it all comes down to just access, right? For me, one of the biggest, most concerning ones, the two are food insecurities. Is a big one. I think a lot of people don't understand food, and they have a lot of insecurity around food. They can't get it. They can't get healthy options because they can't afford healthy options. It's one of the biggest problems I have with food and nutrition is if you want to eat healthy, it's expensive, and it's not everyone's going to have all the money to go get all the healthy food. And sometimes just getting the cheaper version is better for them, and it's too bad. And the other one that I concerned about is childhood development, and where we're at with children and overweight and obesity. And we'll talk about this in more detail when we get into weight management. But right now the numbers are high for childhood obesity, and that is it's really sad that our society is at this point now where we have teenagers that are already pre-diabetic because of their weight and because of how they eat. We need to educate people more. We need to make sure that parents understand. We need to make sure that schools understand. And I'm not saying it's like that for everyone, and that's the problem. It's not like that for everyone, right? It's certain areas have more privileges than others, and it makes it hard for people to achieve the health that they want. So health and society are two real big issues in the fact that not everyone in every society and every community have the rights to health, have the means for health, have the understanding for health. So I think that courses like this are important so we can start educating and getting people to understand how we need to start figuring out how to reach out to everyone so everyone has the same access, everyone has the same ability to achieve health. Because one thing that we'll look at is when we have an unhealthy society, we have a broken society. We have a society that is going to have a failing healthcare system, is going to have high taxes because of that failing healthcare system. So we need to make sure that we educate ourselves. We need to make sure that we educate others so they know exactly how they can achieve health. Now, another important part I want to talk about, again, is going back to environment, looking at environment. We're going to get into environment, as I said, more detailed, because it's not just about community. It's about what you do in your own environment and how you engineer your environment. Because one of the biggest things I hear is the term genetic predisposition. So, for example, certain people are genetically predisposed to things like certain cancers, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. And I don't know how many times I've gone to certain healthcare practitioners and I've been asked, do you have a family member with any conditions? And I have a dad that has diabetes and I have a brother that has a heart condition. And so, yes, I have family history of diabetes and family history of high cholesterol and family history of heart disease. So I guess that means I'm genetically predisposed to those. But the reality is, it's your environment that's going to play a role. And it's not so much genetics that's going to lead to those. It's the environment, and the environment leads to something called epigenetics. And epigenetics are really what happens to the cells when we expose them to things that they shouldn't be exposed to, like too much sitting, not enough exercise, not the right choices of food. So epigenetics is more of the role. Genetics, yes, there is a predisposition, but the environment is going to play a bigger role. So that's why we're going to go through environment and how engineering your environment is going to help you really overcome these genetic predisposed. Because when we look at genetics versus environment, everyone thinks that the genetics is going to be the key factor to if they get a chronic disease or not. But in reality, genetics only plays a 15% role. 15% role in whether you get one of those chronic diseases. The other 85% are from lifestyle and environment. So your lifestyle and the environment that you put yourself in, that is going to really determine if those genetics play a role. in terms of the epigenetics. So what I'm talking about with engineering and environment and lifestyle, well, how you choose to live, that's going to factor into your health. How you decide to eat, how you decide to, move throughout the day. That's the factor that's really going to determine your health, your overall health, as well as your performance. Now, the best way to really explain this is looking at these two individuals. And if you're not sure who these two are, they're an Olympic married couple, Ashton Eaton and Brianne Thiessen-Eaton. Ashton Eaton is an American decathlete, and Brianne Thiessen-Eaton is a Canadian decathlete. Ashton won the gold medal in the last Olympics. Brianne won a bronze medal in the last Olympics. So if you look at these two, they've recently retired from competing because they want to start a family. So you have, if you know anything about the decathlon, it is definitely the toughest track and field event. Okay, decathlon for male, heptathlon for female. Multiple events, 2 days. It's grueling, it's tough. You have to be seriously fit and a serious athlete. So these two, when they have kids, what do you think genetically those kids are going to be like? Pretty phenomenal, I'd say. They have the genetics to be superior athletes, to do great things with health. Genetically, they are going to be machines with these two as parents. But what if these two have kids and they start new careers and they get super busy and they can't put their kids into sport because they're just too busy and they can't find anyone. So all of a sudden their kids aren't in sport and they don't know what to do. They don't have anyone to look after them, and all of a sudden their kids are just sitting at home playing video games all day. They just play video games 4 or 5 hours a day. Diet-wise, oh gosh, they're just too busy to make a healthy diet, so they just give them whatever. So these kids are playing video games, they're watching TV, they're sitting, and they're just eating junk. They're eating poor choice foods. What do you think is going to happen to those genetically produced machines? Do you think they're going to achieve great things if that environment is what they grow up in? No. So environment is so important because the environment that we put ourselves in is the environment that our genetics will thrive on. So if we have genetics where we have diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, and we put our genetics into an environment that those cells will thrive on, that's when it becomes epigenetic. It becomes controlling the cells based on the environmental stressors that you put on it. Flip side, if these two have kids and they put them in track and field and swimming and all sorts of sports and they're active and they eat healthy, well, what's their genetics going to allow then? It's going to be getting to their potential. Right? So each and every one of us have predisposed genetics. We have genetic potential. But the environment, the lifestyle, that is what's going to get you to those genetics, either negative or positive. So that's why I think environment, the environment that we engineer ourselves in, it plays a huge role in our health. And I'm going to give you one takeaway. One takeaway from this. Hopefully you get a whole bunch from the other stuff that I talked about. But one takeaway from this, and this is one thing I like to do, and you'll see a little bit of this as well, is when I work with someone and I try to help them improve their physical ability, I always give them at the end of the session what I call a movement vitamin. right? Just a little movement to help yourself get better. So this is going to be my movement vitamin, all right? Engineer your environment, because how you engineer it will affect your entire day. When you wake up in the morning, what is the first thing you do? First thing you do. It should be make your bed. Do you make your bed? If not, it should be the first thing you do. Why? Because you're engineering your environment. If you make your bed, you make it nice and neat. You tuck the stuff in. Everything's good. Pillows are lined up. Your bed's nice and neat. Well, right off the bat, you just made yourself an environment that is clean, an environment that is organized, an environment that is satisfying, because you just accomplished something. If you leave your bed messy, your environment is messy. And guess what that's going to do? If your external environment is messy, it's going to cause internal messiness. It's going to cause scatteredness. And why I know this is because kids are our truest form of experiments. And if I get my kids to make their bed in the morning, they have a great day. If they don't, they have a terrible day, because their internal environment is messed up because their external environment's messed up. So that's the one little movement vitamin I'm going to give you. If you're not making your bed first thing in the morning, start. Because when you have that external cleanness or external organized aspect, it's going to help your internal organization. It's going to help you perform better tasks. And then at the end of the day, when you go back to that made bed, regardless of how bad your day was, you can go back to that made bed, get in it, go to sleep, reset for the next day. Because that was the first thing you accomplished, was you made the bed. You can go back to that and say, that's something, I had a bad day, but you know what? I made this bed. That's something I accomplished. May sound corny, may sound ridiculous, but honestly, first thing you should do in the morning. If you're not doing it, do it now. All right, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate you listening to this first lecture. Our next lecture is going to be my new thinking of health. We're going to talk about a lot of aspects, healthy lifestyles. We're going to talk about environment, engineering it, a little bit more movement vitamins for you. Okay? We're going to talk about movement. We're going to talk about a lot about how we need to start thinking about health a little bit differently. All right? If you have any questions, I'm going to have the lecture, as I said, as a discussion board. Feel free to ask those questions on the Embracing Health and Wellness discussion board. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Make your bed.